welcome to part 2 of our Brave New World discussion. If you haven't listened to part 1, might want to do that. So check out the episode right above this on your feed. But for those of you who did listen to episode 1, welcome. If you like this show, check us out on Twitter at Socialist Shelf. Yes, we got the at. Works out for us. So hope you enjoy the rest of this conversation on Brave New World. But we're getting back to it. Joss, do you want to pick back up with what you were saying there?
Yeah. Basically the conclusion that we kind of arrive at here. I mean, I say conclusion, but the point that we arrive at here is the difference between Brave New World and 1984 is that the dystopia of Brave New World is much more realistic and believable than 1984. Yeah. Isaac Asimov touched on this in his review of 1984. By the way, I highly recommend everybody go look that up. It's a brilliant piece of writing. Quite apart from the fact that it's very incisive, but like the dystopia of Brave New World is much more believable because we essentially live in it, right? The idea that especially if you live here in the United States, here in the imperial core, right? The idea that it may be bad here and there may be problems in the world, that America's in its benevolence and its attempts to do the right thing. Like there may be problems that America causes, but it's so much worse elsewhere. And wouldn't it be so much worse if somebody else was the global hegemon? That is the lie that you have to swallow. In order to go on living in this society and not just go mad.
Yeah. Exactly. And I definitely want to touch on that a little more, but I wanted to just finish Aldous Huxley's life here real quick, because his ending is very fascinating to me. He wrote a book that I think I would like us to maybe come back to. There's no promises, but there's a book called Island he wrote. It's his last novel. And it's apparently, and I have not read it at all, neither is Joss to my knowledge, a utopia novel. And I would be interested to touch on that at some point. We'll see. But the last thing I want to say is when he died at age 69, he had cancer. He did not wish to die of cancer. He was on his deathbed when he did this. He asked his wife to inject him with 100 milligrams of LSD. And that is how he died. He died of an LSD overdose on purpose. Which is interesting considering the role of drugs in this novel. I don't really know what that says exactly, but I find that fascinating about him, his spirituality. It definitely shows that he's not even, I've read someone said this is a book that is an anti-sex and anti-drug treatise, and I feel like that does a disservice to the novel.
Oh yeah, I mean,
not that I recommend anyone take 100 milligrams of LSD. By any stretch, but I feel like that's a disservice to the novel. That's just not the man he was.
Yeah, it's like you don't come away, like I don't come away, from this thinking that he was some sort of Puritan, but
naturally, no.
But like that's the thing, it's he recognized that these base desires could be used to control people. I mean, not even that they could be used to control people necessarily, but that people could be conditioned to be reduced to these desires,
Right, that's all they are. Yeah. They're nothing but that. In fact, they don't even get the good parts of it. Right. They're not taking soma and reflecting on the universe, They're not, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and and that's why, I mean, the what they have instead of theaters in this book are feelies, like you go these weird, essentially, man. like 4D or 5D theaters or whatever, where you go there just to like experience put yourself in these situations, put yourself in these dangers, to see these savages coming in and having their way with you, perhaps, which is another weird like hangover from the society that came before the society. They still
have to have tension, right? Their plots still have to have plot to them, which they hate, right? If this society was able to, and this is what I know, how I know Huxley holds out some hope for humanity, right? Because if humanity was able to be as flattened as they wanted, then these feelies wouldn't even need to have plots, right?
Oh yeah.
They wouldn't need to have a bad guy. They would, the ideal society for the world controllers would be the feelies are purely pornographic. There are these still human elements even after 500 plus years that they cannot iron out, and that is, the human spirit lives on. It's fascinating, and to come, to finish what I was saying with Huxley's death. This is just an interesting piece of trivia. Do you know what day he died? This will blow your mind.
Not off the top of my head.
November 22nd, 1963. He died the same day, not only as C.S. Lewis, but also as JFK.
Wow.
And so he got no news coverage of his death, despite being one of the preeminent authors in the world. And very weird. In C.S. Lewis as well, also another British author, who, I could see us hitting Narnia at some point.
100%.
Very different man than Aldous Huxley. But just fascinating. It's there was no news reception of his death because JFK died on that same day.
Wow.
And it's just very interesting. In fact, I've read some articles saying his wife was actually somewhat offended by the lack of coverage of his death. We have to, I will say that the sensationalism of JFK's death, it's hard to fault any newspaper for not covering that first.
Oh yeah, it's
interesting nonetheless. And also the death by LSD on his own terms, also fascinating. A really strange guy in his politics, which were very undefined. He called himself a socialist and refused to define himself beyond that. Probably due to the era in which he lived, and he would like to continue being published. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's certain things you had to, there's certain strictures you had to, and still have to abide by to really get a wide following and any kind of support.
Well, especially then when there was more of a legal regime around it.
Yes,
he was a member of the Fabian Society, to my understanding,
right?
Which also Orwell was a member of. I'm less interested in his politics and what he pushed for is where he was coming from. I think it's unfair, and it has been characterized as such. And I read a number of book reviews of this book before this podcast. Multiple book reviews described Brave New World as a socialist society, which I found to be, while yes, there is like a one world government. Yes, there is a you could call it a nationalized key industries. I find that to be a bit off base.
Yeah,
socialist. You know what I mean? Even by the most twisted.
Because there's economic planning, certainly, but like it's not for meeting human needs. It's not for enabling human curiosity, because that's the thing. Human curiosity and and pursuit of knowledge and creativity is as much a human need, in a different way, of course, than food and shelter. But that's something that's processed out of the society of Brave New World, and any kind of socialist project recognizes, the human individuality and creativity and strives to empower it.
Precisely. Here's what I think, and here's why I think people were able to be deceived by that. And this is what's interesting. What it is describing is a late and unchallenged fascist society. And why people get confused and why people even are able to confuse certain fascist elements with socialist elements, right, is because it is like looking through a dark mirror. It has an element of populism, it has an element of public buy-in, it has an element of state control, and it has this sort of centralized goal towards it, with a ruling class that is brought in towards a central ideal. which is why people can get certain things mixed up. And that's why certain things can be so deceptive. But the key difference being under this fascistic society in which corporations and the government have been brought to be one. And to be clear, this book doesn't go into it, but there are corporations still. Multiple companies are referenced. They've been brought into partnership with the government, such as it is. And the government exists to make profit. It exists to insert a specific will on the people. Yes, these industries are nationalized in a sense, but they are not the people's industries. They are not nationalized in the sense they were given over to the people. There are no elections. There are no unions. There is no workplace democracy. Mm-hmm. So, and you can say, oh, well, there's no genocide. Yeah, the genocide's already happened,
Yeah, all the culture fans,
They did it all. And yeah, there's some natives alive for them to laugh at and gawk at. And there's even a joke thrown in by a random character that, oh yeah, if they ever get out of line, they've been gas bombed enough.
Oh yeah, and of course coming from a time where the use of gas against native populations of one stripe or another was very, very much I believe it was Churchill himself who loudly championed that tactic.
Churchill specifically said about Indian people, who cares if we give some of them the sniffles, which is one of the most nightmarish things ever said by a world leader, in my opinion, considering what he was talking about doing.
Yes, absolutely hideous creature.
Genuinely. And what I come around to is why there are people who are able to look at this and say, oh, this is almost, this almost looks utopian, this almost looks socialist, is because, first of all, that's how fascism characterizes itself. That's how the state wants to look. You can call yourself Nazis, National Socialists. And because it is an inversion of human potential, it is an inversion of, the ultimate human goals. The ultimate human goal of a socialist society there isn't, a specific one in the sense of how far we can reach, but it is to empower every individual as part of a collective. This is to empower a sort of imaginary collective that really is just a profit-making machine. A socialist society is, you are part of a greater whole, but you are valued as an individual. Whereas in this, the individual is meaningless, yet encouraged to feed. It is,
it's literally a society existing for its own sake.
Right. Like, why are you still around? That's what I would ask Mustafa Mond if I had him in the room with me. Okay, so why don't we just end it, right? If we don't want to go anywhere, if we don't want to do anything.
You could build a very similarly functioning society in Minecraft.
Mm-hmm. You can, and people have. And they're more interesting. In the sense of like the day-to-day activity. So to, bring it back down from this sort of elevated level, I wanted to say before, we got into certain other themes, the prose of the novel, because we both like to write. I wanted to talk briefly about the prose. We talked about it as Huxley. What did you think of just the way the novel was written? Because it is very like understated, really. It doesn't spend a whole lot of time impressing itself upon you, yet it's quite beautiful, I think.
It's I learned I found that I came away learning a few new words from this. It's not as verbose and not as it doesn't use language in precisely the same very specifically finding very, very specific words that are perfectly suited to the Lovecraft was really good at this, right? He found very specific and archaic words that were specific to very specific sensations and sights and sounds and feelings, and this book doesn't do as much of that, but it certainly creates the there's a rhythm to it, and there's a cadence that it's written as um it's written in that kind of elevated sense that you expect from a novel of the 1930s, but it's very, very readable to somebody today. A and B, like, it's got a sense of cadence, and I'm looking at chapter 3 right now. How it's a really striking section that I'll use as an example here of its attention to cadence, because, like, you have it's basically back and forth between the tour of the Department of Hatcheries and Conditioning.
Yep.
And
Frantic almost.
it gets frantic, because it switches from the tour to a conversation between Lenina and her current beau.
Fanny.
And
Fanny's
Foster.
her friend.
Fanny's her friend. Fanny's her friend. Henry Foster is the dude that she's sleeping with currently. And, like, it switches from between these and between it switches between them, and, like, there's another scene mixed in there, and, like, it's, as you say, it becomes more frantic, more like line, just like one sentence at a time from each source, and kind of whirling you into this vortex of context and history and science, and kind of, it's kind of disorienting you at the point where you're kind of putting the pieces together. It's kind of a Soma-esque sort of it's kind of a Soma-esque sort of thing, right? How the book itself here is keeping you from putting it down right away, because it's sucking you into like, if you're repulsed by the society, it's sucking you into this into, like, the act of trying to comprehend it.
Yeah. No, naturally. And I think a thing that we want to try and do with this show is we want to have, with every book, and I'm sure we'll read books that we don't love, which we both love this one.
Oh, I have some in mind that I quite enjoyed that you might not, and I'm sure you have the same.
And I'm sure there are ones we'll both hate, and that'll be fun too.
Oh yes.
I would like to have quotes from them that we walk away with enjoying, no matter what. And we're talking about prose, and I think we should both share maybe a favorite quote from the novel. So I'll do that first while we're here, and maybe you can do that as well if you have one on hand. I would like to share this, and I think this is a good summary of what you were saying about how it was written. A very beautiful, a very sensible, thought-felt, but not particularly long-winded summary. This is from one of the later chapters. When John is really getting into it with Mond, and Mond says, "What need have we of God?" And John has said over and over, "Well, we have this for God. We have this for God. We have the soul. We have whatever." And Mond's like, "We have everything we need. What do we need, bud? What do we need?" And then he just says, and to be clear, John has been quoting Shakespeare endlessly. He's been really fighting, and this is the quote that makes me say, John, our protagonist or co-protagonist, loses the debate. And this is what he says, or this is what the book says from John's perspective. Quote, "He would have liked to say something about solitude, about night, about the mesa lying under the moon, about the precipice, the plunge into shadowy darkness, about death. He would have liked to speak, but there were no words, not even in Shakespeare." End quote. And man, not even in Shakespeare.
Yeah.
So good. So good.
Because how could Shakespeare possibly imagine this?
Yeah, no, I mean, how could Shakespeare be expected to? Do you happen to have a line or a passage on hand?
Yeah, and this was particularly striking to me, and it's kind of the whole John versus Mond thing toward the end was I mean, the tragedy of it. It was striking to me because the tragedy of it is that John has this sense right? He has this idea that there's something more beautiful out there in terms of human creativity that this society has lost,
Right.
but he only has the end product of that, right? He only has Shakespeare. He can't
Yeah.
explain why, he can't explain the context around it.
He
He
doesn't know who
just has
Shakespeare
that
was. He doesn't know who
exact
Shakespeare was.
exactly. He just has that, kind of, again, to the extent that there's such a thing as human nature, right? He has that sense of curiosity, and the sense of, there must be something out. So, but I mentioned earlier, I think that Helmholtz Watson is kind of this inversion of John in that way, because
Yeah.
again, he has that kind of curiosity, but he doesn't have the context to really he doesn't have the cultural context to really put it into words. And nothing sums that up more beautifully, I think, than the end of chapter 12 here.
Before you say that, I just want to say this literally just occurred to me, and I would kick myself if I didn't say it.
Sir,
Helmholtz has come to the same conclusions as John. John on a physical and spiritual level, and Helmholtz on an intellectual level, and they cannot understand each other.
right, because they come from completely different worlds.
But they come to very similar conclusions following these same lines, and that's really the human that Huxley wants us to be. Anyway, I didn't want to interrupt you, but man, if
that's a brilliant observation.
It's not even foils. I don't think there's a great word for that. But I would have kicked myself if I hadn't pointed that out. Anyway, you've got this passage, and I think it's a brilliant one if I know what you're thinking of. So go ahead.
Yeah. This is something that's fundamentally like universally human, but people coming to the same point and being on opposite sides of a glass wall they don't even know is there. Anyway, yeah. So John's reading Romeo and Juliet at the end of chapter 12. And Juliet's forbidden from seeing Romeo. She has to marry Paris, of course. Is there no pity sitting in the clouds that sees into the bottom of my grief? So he has that really wrenching moment from Shakespeare. And when Juliet said this, Helmholtz broke out in an explosion of uncontrollable guffawing. The mother and father, grotesque obscenity, forcing the daughter to have someone she didn't want. And the idiotic girl not saying that she was having someone else whom, for the moment at any rate, she preferred. In its smutty absurdity, the situation was irresistibly comical, And that's, I don't think we'd said it directly, but again, this is a society where the concept of a mother, the concept of a father, the concept of, viviparous reproduction, of, people having sex for the purposes of procreation, pregnancy, birth, all this is extremely obscene to people, to the point of physical revulsion, and Helmholtz can't help but laugh at this sorrow, to us, to you and me, it's we can recognize somebody being denied the ability to be with the person that they love, but Helmholtz doesn't even have the concept of that. He's like, well, why doesn't she just say that she wants to be with Romeo? Why doesn't why do her mother and father have any say in her affairs? It's the pathos of it, the emotionality, the aspect of it. It's completely incomprehensible to Helmholtz, and he goes on to say, I know quite well that one needs ridiculous mad situations like that. One can't write really well about anything else. Why was that old fellow such a marvelous propaganda technician? He's referring to Shakespeare. Because he had so many insane, excruciating things to get excited about. You got to be hurt and upset. Otherwise, you can't think of the really good, penetrating X-ray-ish phrases. But fathers and mothers, he shook his head. You can't expect me to keep a straight face about fathers and mothers. And who's going to get excited about a boy having a girl or not having her? We need some other kind of madness and violence, he finishes off with, but what? Where can one find it? He was silent, then shaking his head. I don't know, he said at last. I don't know. And it's that inability of his to really see past the conditioning that he's grown up in,
which I really appreciate, because if my theory is correct, this is Huxley's character he relates to most closely. And I feel very strongly that it is. First of all, it's credits to Huxley as a writer that his character that he relates most closely to is not just the guy who knows everything, but also is asking these questions. What can I write about? What can I understand? If I figured things out, what else can I figure out? Where else can I reach?
And as a writer, what are your limitations? Like you've set yourself this task of coming to this coming to certain conclusions and telling certain stories in a way that people can puzzle over and debate about and make podcasts about and whatnot. But what's as a product of the as a product of your conditioning, as a product of your society, as a product of the environments that you move in, and the worldview that you build up, what are you prevented from seeing and comprehending? And I think he's very aware, Huxley, as a writer, of his limitations on that front in a way that Helmholtz never could be.
Absolutely. And it's Helmholtz is allowed to have these moments of to put it, jovially, he just goes, well, if I was Romeo and Juliet, I would have done it differently.
It's a very cinema sins sort of approach to it.
Yeah, well, why didn't he? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, ding. Yeah. That's exactly right. But this is an irony poisoned society, to the point of, I think I wrote this down. Let me see. Yeah. Here's a good thing. It's so irony poisoned. It's so irony poisoned that they literally play music called the Malthusian Blues. Referring to Malthus, the guy who wrote about overpopulation theory and how people will destroy the world because there were too many of them in consumption. Guy who is, by the way, wrong, eugenicist. We do not support Malthus. But the point of the matter is the fact that they talk about the Malthusian Blues, the fact that look at their last names. There's only a few hundred last names in the world, and their last names are things like Marx, Trotsky, Rothschild, Engels.
We got a Lenina,
Yeah, we got a Diesel, we got a Bakunin. Like,
it's history. It is historical figures. It's titans of politics and philosophy, and they're just completely stripped of their context and just reduced to sounds.
The idea that it is the ultimate, I'm not into politics, I'm apolitical society. It is the idea of just of the realism of the world coming into being, the natural superstructure built, just evolving into a eternal superstructure where no one questions the structure. It's the ultimate capitalist fantasy. That's the thing.
If great man theory is so advanced, it's indistinguishable from nature.
Yes. And that's the thing, and which allows one to make the argument. I could sit here and make the argument that this world is maybe a better one than we have. I could make that argument. You know what I mean? Like, you could make the conceivable argument that, like, if you really wanted argument from the basis of happiness, from the basis that Mustafa Mond is coming from, well, people are, they're happy. You could make that argument pretty cohesively.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's so tricky about it. And that's what makes it, I think, a challenging piece of literature, in the way that something that like 1984 maybe just just really isn't. And I don't really, it's not vital that we compare it to 1984, but I think it's important because these are really the two, to me, the two parents of dystopian literature, at least Western dystopian literature as we understand it.
Yeah, they certainly, they've they're nearly always brought up in the same breath,
And you really can see most dystopian literature as the child of one or the other, if they're trying to make a comment about politics, of course.
Mm-hmm.
If they're just, a fun zombie flick, that's different. But I'm talking about if they're making real commentary, you're really a child of one or the other. I really think that. Authoritarianism is inherent in dystopia, but how that authoritarianism shows itself. I'm trying to think of a way to describe this best, and maybe I've already communicated what I'm trying to say, but it's really in the sense of this is entertaining yourself to death, and that's why I feel like this is an incredibly prescient novel.
Do you think you can divide those two schools into is there a resistance and isn't there?
Maybe that I feel like every dystopian novel that I've read or every dystopian piece of fiction has a resistance, but they have different reasons for doing so.
Mm-hmm.
There is this order is evil, and there is this is not how we're supposed to be, and I think those are actually different. Brave New World, it's not so much it's evil that we have a pro-scarcity society. It's evil that we figured out the math to get everyone what they need. That no one complains about that. In fact, John praises those things. It's the death of humanity versus the other side of things, which is the raging against everything the society is, which is much more unrealistic, because to live in a world, you find things you like in the world. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
That's why I find Brave New World to be, I don't know all dystopian fiction, but aside from one of my other favorites, which is Fahrenheit 451, it really is just among, or if not my favorite piece of dystopian art.
Facts. Man. And it's not really been my genre, TBH. I mean, I suppose you could is dystopia, and now I don't, because I don't have as much experience with it as you do. Is dystopia necessarily set in the future? Is it necessarily set in an alternate reality than ours?
It's hard to imagine it not. It's in a world that is about our world, that is allegorical in the sense that usually is future. It's hard to imagine I've read books that are alternate futures that are not necessarily good, but yeah, I think it has to kind of be a future world or an alternate world. I feel like it's hard. I don't want to limit it. I might be making mistakes here, but it's hard to imagine a dystopia that's not. I mean, it's an imagined state of society in which there's a great suffering or injustice. It's usually totalitarian. It's usually maybe post-apocalyptic, something like that.
Mm-hmm. But it's speculative in nature.
I mean, I think it has to be. If you were describing something that's already happened, you would either be doing, historical fiction or fiction.
Fantasy.
Yeah, something along those lines.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I would absolutely. I'm not one normally for. There's very few books that I would reread, but I could definitely see myself returning to this one.
And I say this so rarely, really, really so rarely. I think this could be very effectively adapted to not necessarily to film, but to stage. I could really see a good stage adaptation of this. But maybe that's just because I want to see on stage John versus Mustafa Mond. Maybe I'm just
I want to see on stage, the world controller talking to the grad students touring the Department of Hatcheries and Conditioning. I want to see like all these conversations about the world and society overlapping and just being overwhelming and kind of turning into this slurry that you eventually just lose track of.
Maybe that's more the center of what I'm looking for.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, um it really does lend itself. There's humanity in almost every character. No, not in almost, in every character you come across in this. And it's a thing that really hurts a lot of dystopian fiction that would come after this. That it's really obsessed with describing the society and the problems with it. That it loses the characters, and the characters in this, even when they have moments of simplicity. Lenina is not a terribly complicated character, but you do feel for her. You do know where she's coming from. She is a victim. It works in a way that just a lot of these novels don't, and a lot of these movies don't. And that's why I find it to be just a great commentary on what we're living under, And of course, we're living under a very different world than Brave New World. There is resistance. There is hardship in a way there isn't in this world. There is conflict. State conflict. There's not one world government. Capitalism has not conquered the entire world. And more than that, the capitalist class has not come into some kind of cohesion as they have in this world, which, I don't think Huxley nor we are under the impression they actually would in real life. That's not really the point.
Mm-hmm.
In real life, I have trouble imagining a one world capitalist government that doesn't devolve, but that's not a criticism of Huxley, because Huxley's not writing, this is what's going to happen in 2500. He's, making a point.
Right.
But I think, especially in the imperial core, I'm not talking about, on the externalities, the third world, but I'm talking about the imperial core in the United States and Western Europe, the entertaining of oneself to death. I mean, it's almost trite to even point out.
Yeah.
But that's what's going on, man. That's what's going on.
Yeah, and it's half the work of being a socialist organizer is to dispel the decades and decades of propaganda that you've just passively absorbed about how other societies are and how socialist societies in particular are. Like you can go through life and just reproduce and repeat this, that, or the other canard or piece of common knowledge, and that's if people tell you about stuff at all. Like, yeah. I didn't learn about Fred Hampton in high school.
Right.
I didn't learn about I think my IB 20th century history teacher was a trot, but like we didn't really get into anything too revolutionary.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's to exist and to go on existing comfortably in this world. Like there is a certain amount of buy-in, absolutely, that you have to participate in.
But yeah, it ultimately concludes in the fact that the first world, or however you want to define it, the Western world, the hyper-capitalist world, the imperialist world, the United States, Western Europe, and the bourgeois of the world, if they want to overcome, of course, the oppression of others, of course, the oppression of, in this world, the gammas and I don't remember what they all call it, the epsilons and all that, the literal oppressed, but also their own oppression in the sense of the weights placed on them by the system of who they're allowed to be. If they want to overcome that, there has to be a reckoning with the comfort they have. Now, the comfort not being how happy they are, because that's a very important point. Mustafa Mond literally saying that passion and deep love and deep feeling can be rejected. must be rejected. Not saying, oh, you have to give up your happiness. No, not saying you have to give up your health. No, not saying you have to give up anything like that. But give up your comfort, the necessity of that, giving up your ease, giving up your position, the necessity of that to accomplish anything. I feel like if there's any takeaway, if there's any action item from this novel, that's what it is. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, brilliantly said, because it can legitimately be depressing to step outside kind of the to the extent that one enjoys a much greater standard of living here in the Imperial Core. Like you can if you're a certain type of person, and of course you and I are very fortunate to live the lives we live in the country that we live in.
I'm in a heated apartment right now.
Exactly.
We're talking over the internet.
And that's the thing. All right. But, and it's depressing it can be depressing, to step outside and to sort of realize, well, shoot, the presence of these amenities and the standard of living that we enjoy is directly derived from, the super exploitation of the global south, of the imperial periphery, of this continued system by which the United States and its clients in Western Europe and Japan rip off the rest of the world to the tune of like trillions of dollars a year. Like it is, and it's overwhelming and it's daunting, and it's nobody can fight it alone. That's
no, of course not. And if you try to, if you rage against the system without any intellectual understanding, you become a Bernard. You become just a nerd who's like, I think society is bad.
Even a John to an extent,
you become a John. John is probably the best case scenario by yourself.
Who has the correct, like he, in the sense of like having not had his humanity conditioned away, he has that, he has that sense, but he has, again, no theoretical grounding. Like I was reading like the bit where John's like starting the riot, just like throwing the drugs out the window and like encouraging the Epsilons and whatnot to free themselves. These people don't know what freedom is. They don't have that.
Nor should they be expected to.
Yeah, and I was reading this and I was like, this is very adventurous of him,
Yeah, man, it's fascinating. It's and also a way the book accomplishes making you in such a short time feel like part of that society is very interesting, because I can feel like, John, no, baby, what are you doing? Cringing, you know what I mean? Like in a way that if I was there, I probably actually wouldn't have in real life, you know what I mean? You're right, though. It's adventurous. It's self-indulging, and this is a society where, and I don't really know how to even communicate this beyond just telling you to read the book. But the self is over emphasized and also non-existent, right? Like that's such a contradiction, and I know it is. But the self is meaningless and yet is everything in this world.
Oh yeah. Well, because to the extent that, sorry to cut you off, but like,
no, go ahead.
Well, yeah, to the extent that there is a self, it is treated as something to it's treated as something to be satisfied and like put to rest. It is treated as like, the
it's religious libido. It's a hunger.
Yeah, exactly. You yourself are an itch to be scratched, and that's the thing. Like the religious ceremonies, to the extent that Fordism bears any resemblance to our religions, it's literally just my cat is sneezing in the background. It's literally just like this mass like drug trip, mass orgy, just losing yourself in it's the toxic like hyper positivity of just going somewhere and just rolling aimlessly, like
here's I feel like a personal anecdote that I feel like this book wrote for me. I was at an event once. It doesn't matter what the event is; it's not important. It was just a community festival. I was passing out flyers for sort of a community get together for us to discuss the problems we were facing as a city. And I was approached by a guy, and he saw as I post passing out, and he said, "You're a socialist, yeah?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm a socialist, and I want us to all get together and discuss, rent control as a city. I want us to discuss labor as a city." And he said, "Take this." And he passed me a piece of paper, and it was a event he was hosting, or someone he knew was hosting, at a cabin up in the mountains. And they were going to take shrooms together. And they were going to all sit together. And he said, "We're going to take shrooms, and I've got the money. Don't worry. I'll buy you all the food you need for as long as we need till we understand everything." And I was like, "Well, what do you mean? Eventually I got to go back down." He's like, "No, we can stay up there as long as we need. I got money." I don't know this guy. I'm not trying to dog on this guy. I don't know who he is. I don't know what he was talking about. I don't know if he owned that cabin, but let's say he did. He was proposing what is essentially the equivalent of the society. He was proposing we retreat, and we sort of sit with ourselves, but then we do nothing but that. Not to any end goal, but to sit with ourselves, to feel, and that's such an easy thing to do, especially if you live in the West. You can just sit with yourself and you can feel, and for a relatively low price you can experience highs, and you can be drunk, and you can whatever, you can overcome these things in this way that doesn't help anyone.
No words, that's literally, like, it's literally a scene right out of the book,
Right, it might as well have been. And it was this, to be clear, this wasn't like some native guy saying, "Let's go connect with his ancestors." This is a white guy with dreads. Like, it's,
just
like,
some guy who can just indefinitely retreat to the wilderness, and
and he
God,
just told me, "My dad's got us covered." Now, I don't know how much money he has. I don't know what his dad had. I'm not going to I hope this guy is living his best life. I'm not singling him out, but man, if that wasn't a scene out of Brave New World,
because you can understand, you can understand everything in the world, let's, for the sake of argument, and let's say that you go to the cabin and you do,
yeah,
right? But what do you do with that, right? I mean, Mustafa
what do
Mond
you do
understands.
if you do understand? Yeah,
Mustafa Mond understands perfectly, and he's not changing shit. Yeah,
Mustafa Mond gets it. Mustafa Mond has all the capacity to be just a great, a great, a warrior for justice. But he decides happiness in the most narrow sense is better. And reading this has made me like, I haven't read a lot of utopia novels. I feel like that's a gap in my understanding. It's certainly not a thing we ever addressed in college. So I don't have a lot of framework for this. The only framework I really have that I can think of, besides just my own dreams and also Edward Bellamy, is like something like Star Trek, is the idea of, if I'm imagining what a good world, not in a sense of perfection, but in the sense of what it ought to be, what we ought to be striving for, is we ought to be striving for, not once we achieve what we need, we ought to be striving for something greater understanding, more personal fulfillment, not in some level of on some level of personal gain, like not on some level of I have more money than this guy next to me, but on who I am, what I can't achieve, and that's, the difference in the dreams of a fascist and the dreams of a socialist. You know, the dream of a fascist is we have everything we need. We have a post-scarcity society, and we're all, relatively alike, and we're the ultimate race. And whether that be racial or not, we're the ultimate race. We're the ultimate human.
We're going to build Albert Speer's like ideal Berlin, and then go to the moon and build like statues of Hitler, like it's
yeah. And even if you're not like, even if you're not like making that a racial thing, like even if you're some kind of modern fascist that considers yourself multicultural, which by the way, you aren't, but even if you were, but most of them aren't, even if you consider yourself multicultural or whatever, you're some kind of modern fascist, you're going to imagine, okay, the extermination of all cultures but mine. You know what I mean? Like, I'm gonna exterminate all countries but mine. I'm gonna exterminate all it's and then I'm gonna have some ascended society that is post scarcity. I only imagine post poverty when everyone follows my specific cultural ideology, and whether or not they fit into my racial caste, they fit into my caste as I like understand it ought to be. Versus the socialist idea of a utopia is, yes, it continues to be post scarcity, and yes, there is a level of planning, there's this and that, but people are reaching out for their own potential. There aren't requirements on the individual past what they need to do to make the world better, and they are part of the world, not in the sense of they're a meaningless cog. They're part of the world in the sense of every act you do helps your brother, helps your sister, helps your sibling. There's just and also like this book, while it and the reason I reference like multiculturalism as, or not multiculturalism, but like multiracialism as a concept of like a possible fascist, is not because it's a common thing, but because this book sort of does it at moments. I reference that only because this book has its moments of being like, oh, well, there's other races or whatever as part of this one world government, but it is all part of this one culture. And while that's not a legit fascism that's ever existed, while there's never been a non-racist fascism, even if there was, it would stamp out all other cultures before it, because that is the simple logic of
yeah.
You know
well,
and
even in this like 500 years post 500 or 600 years post Ford society, right? It's still, you can still kind of see the trappings of 1930s race science. Like there's that little, like there's that little bit in the I think chapter 1 even that mentions the that like they're trying to branch off like the way that they grow human beings is they irradiate an ovary, right, and get it to like bud into all these different like eggs, and they mentioned that if you're sub-Saharan African, or if you're like Southeast Asian, like you're more like predisposed to like greater fecundity, and just this incredibly like archaic idea about people at certain latitudes.
The way I read that, he said, they have an advantage over us over there in Africa. The way I read it was, no, the scientists in Africa are just winning. They're doing a better job than you, man, and you're still falling back on racial prejudices. That's the way I read it. I don't know Huxley. I don't know how he was trying to write it, but that,
Oh yeah, and I'm not accusing Huxley of this, that, or the other thing, but like it's there's that that's the thing. Like a fascist society is permanently constrained by those those like bizarre ideals of what constitutes humanity and what's not. It fetishizes
precisely.
It fetishizes conflict, where a socialist society would a socialist society empowers people to rise to challenges. A fascist society, believes that the highest human ideal is carnage.
Right, and that's that's why this is society is in a way you know, to call it fascist is obviously defining it by our own terms. If I was living in their time, maybe we would have come up with a different state of capitalism to call it. It doesn't really matter because we're living in our own time. Um, because of course, it's not waging war, but it's already conquered what it needs to conquer. It is stamped out indigenous practices. You
Hmm.
know, it has. Here's the thing: the mass majority of racial minorities in the novel that are described, despite this fact that there's apparently some kind of multiculturalism, they're described as, the gammas and the epsilons. Um,
Oh yeah, and like and especially like at those lower castes, like they're brachycephalic, like
yep.
they're described with all these adjectives that explicitly refer to the shapes of their heads.
Yeah, it's
It's
it's very intentional.
hmm.
Um, so it's like Huxley calling out not just the hardcore right wingers, but also like this sort of multicultural liberal who dreams of this ultimate capitalist utopia in which their culture wins.
Hmm.
And it's like, yeah, this is also what happens when your culture, quote unquote, wins, when your nation, which is totally different than race, quote unquote, wins.
Oh yeah,
It,
it's that
it's
end of history kind of arrogance that we here in the global liberal West have achieved this. I mean, I mean, it's the stuff that justifies American imperial adventures, right? It's like we
precisely.
have
And
we have
in
here
Britain
we
at the
have
time,
yeah, we use human rights today, and women's rights, any other, and freedom and democracy, the same way that the British Empire used civilization, the same way that before them, the Spanish Empire used Christianity.
precisely.
It's this thing that we have that the heathens over there do not. And oh shoot, they've converted to the Christianity, so they're okay. Well, they're different, like caste of human, if human they be at all. Like it's just people coming up with category after category. To
Exactly.
um,
And that's what it ultimately comes down to. And the novel doesn't present us with an answer. I'm not going to say it does. Uh, the novel doesn't present us with what the world ought to look like. Um, but it presents us with a what I find proper criticism of the world we live in. It presents us with a proper understanding of that which we are working within. And I think ultimately it doesn't really tell us who to be or how to be, but it definitely tells us what not to do.
mhm. And to be somebody, to be
To be
something.
somebody. Yes, exactly. It's not saying be this guy. It's just like, man, don't be nobody.
John was happiest when he was in a lighthouse, like chopping logs, and
Man, like, yeah, exactly. Leave him alone there.
yeah, and not to say that we should all go out and just like chop logs and tune out, but
Sure, but that
just
if in that society we would probably be best off doing that.
yeah, yeah, and to get to the point where we can do that, like it's it'll be a Herculean effort to organize against the order that enables certain people to.
Right. So yeah, ultimately the takeaway here, I think, to sort of try and wrap it up, the takeaway here is to understand the difference between entertainment and entertainment to death, to understand the difference between pleasure and happiness, really. Pleasure and happiness, really.
Mm,
Uh um sensory stimulation and joy. I think
mm,
that's an important thing to differentiate and to understand the idea of sacrifice as something that does not necessarily ruin happiness. I think that's an important thing to walk away from. And I think also, aside from the morals, the way to walk away from this in the historical perspective is to understand Huxley going into this era of mass confrontation moving in this incredibly consumptive society, and seeing the rise of a society that, despite how consumptive his society was, as Britain, dwarfed all consumption, dwarfed all self-indulgence, dwarfed all self-obsession of any society that ever existed in the rise of the United States. Him viewing that while writing this book, it's important to view that context. So I think that's the way you understand it, and I think the way to walk away from it is to understand those things. What else would you draw from it as we're kind of moving into final thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think you summed it up perfectly. You know, he lived in a world that, if you paid attention to world affairs, was a very scary world to live in. You know, you had fascism rising worldwide to counter a restive population. You know, you had the first real attempt at a workers and peasants government in the Soviet Union, you know,
Yeah.
scaring the hell out of powerful capitalists worldwide, you know. And the world seemed headed, and indeed was headed, for a major confrontation that you know, nobody could really anticipate where it might lead. This is the sort of book that you know, this is the sort of book that I think could get written today.
Yeah. Though I will say I would give like my right arm to know what Huxley would write today. You know?
Well, he did write Brave New World Revisited almost 3 decades after, to kind of assess where the world had ended up in relation to his vision. I haven't
Right.
read that.
But man, I'd be fascinated to know just like the internet, you know?
Oh yeah, dude. I mean, he would. I can't help but think that he might be a John in that sense. You know, that he might be somebody who just like explicitly doesn't use social media.
I could see that, but also, you know, it's interesting. We really can't say what he would do, what we
No.
would. It's fascinating to think about, and you know, ultimately ultimately one can wonder. And yeah, I think what the takeaway is for us now, though, whatever it might have been then, whatever Huxley might have wanted, what the goal is now is to connect with your fellow man on a personal, on a real basis, not on some kind of transactional thing, to talk to your fellow human beings, to engage with real art, to engage with yourself, to sit by yourself sometimes and think, you know, and ultimately to realize what the forces trying to entertain you to death are hiding, what they are doing, why they are trying to entertain you to death. And at the end of the day, just step up, to organize, and to try and build a better society, because we deserve it, and because the alternative is death by pixie stick. You know what I mean?
The alternative
It's
is
death by sugar high.
yeah, the alternative is just playing Minecraft and drinking until you pass out, until somebody knocks out your local substation, and like the big time kicks off.
Yep. And we have no intention of letting that be the end of things.
Mm-hmm.
No intention at all. You know, humanity has come too dang far for for us to end it watching, you know, reruns until we just, you know, go to sleep in a soma
Yeah,
overdose.
yeah. You know, humanity has come far, and who knows how far it will go and where. You know,
But that depends
the
on every single person listening to this and every single person in the world.
no pressure.
Yeah, no pressure, right? But that's the thing. We're all part of a social organ, but not in the Brave New World sense, you know. Not in the you're part of a social organ as in as in you're meaningless, but you're part of the social organ, as in you're part of the vital human project sense. And to me, at least, that can get me up in the morning,
Yeah. It's to the extent that we have any particular reason for being here. At the very least, it should be to uplift each other, and to ensure that we can participate as fully in our society as is practicable as is possible. And the definition of what is possible is always changing.
Yes. And that is the fundamental thing that you have to pursue, in a socialist utopia versus a capitalist utopia. In Brave New World, they will stay like that forever. In a socialist utopia, there's always a horizon. There will always be a horizon. There
always
will
a horizon.
Be a new world.
And no one, always a horizon, new worlds to build. No one is superfluous.
Absolutely. Here's the thing, man. Brave New World, yes, there's a level of irony in that, but we can build a real Brave New World, And
100%.
that's what it's exciting. Well, hey, we're at the end here, and this is, as I said, the first episode. We don't have social media yet. I'm going to make a Twitter account for us, or email or whatever. We don't have that yet, so I'm not going to plug it. But hopefully it'll be in the description of the episode, so check that out. Check out Brave New World if you've not read it. If you have read it, reread it. I don't know. That's fine. Find
it at your local bookstore, find it at your library, find it on Project Gutenberg.
Absolutely. And when we upload this, we'll upload at least another episode pertaining to another book. So I'm not going to recommend you our next book yet. Going forward, hopefully the plan will be to say, hey, we're going to be reading this next week. But hopefully when we upload this, we'll be uploading at least 2 episodes worth or two books worth of content. So I'll leave you beyond that. But yeah, thank you very much for listening. This one is probably going to be, if not our roughest episode, among our rougher episodes. Much appreciated to everybody, even if there's only like 2 of you.
Hey, we can go rougher. You never know.
Absolutely. Hey, I've had fun recording it. Even if it's just us two, I've had fun talking.
Absolutely. I would do this even if there weren't a podcast.
Absolutely. No, it's absolutely. I mean, we got dinner the other day, and mostly this is what we did. So, oh man,
I would do this even if there weren't dinner.
There you go. Even if there weren't dinner, you heard him. You heard it here first, folks. All right. You got anything left to say, Joss?
Take your soma, kids.
Take your soma, kids. You said a gram.
It's better than a dam.
It's better than a dam. Many and more are saying this. Many and more. Okay. All right. Signing off. We don't have a sign off yet, so we're just gonna say y'all have a good one, and praise forward.
Praise forward.